Have you ever just looked around and thought, how is everyone affording this? You see the luxury vacations, the designer clothes, the perfect dream homes. Even people your age or younger seem to be living in a completely different world. And it feels like no matter how hard you work, how much you save, or how careful you are with your money, you're still falling behind. So you open your phone, scroll through social media, and see friends your age buying houses, going to Europe, eating at restaurants that charge $12 for sparkling water, and somehow they're still smiling. They're still spending and still traveling, and you're just staring at your credit card bill, wondering how groceries got so expensive, why your rent went up again, and how on earth everyone is affording a house in this economy. But here's the thing, it's not just you. Millions of people are feeling this exact same way. 55% of millennials say they live paycheck to paycheck. That's millions and millions of people. And it's not just millennials. Right now, household debt in America is at a record-breaking $18.2 trillion. That's up $170 billion in just the last 3 months. Now, credit card debt alone has soared past $1.3 trillion. And delinquencies, which is when people fall behind on their payments, are rising fast. And yet, the illusion remains that everyone else is doing just fine. Why? Because right now, interest rates are at the highest they've been in decades. The average credit card APR is now over 24%, and yet people are still borrowing just to keep up appearances. And that's especially true online. Social media has magnified this illusion to extreme levels. About 7 in 10 millennials report financial FOMO, or fear of missing out, because of what they see online. And even though the net worth of millennials has actually gone up between 2019 and today, it's something people are calling phantom wealth. People say they might have a higher net worth, but they don't feel wealthier. Multiple studies show that high social media use is directly tied to anxiety, depression, and lower financial self-worth, even when nothing else has changed about their actual financial reality. And nowhere is this more obvious than the housing market. Back in the 1990s, for example, the average first-time homebuyer was just 28 years old. Today, that number is 38. That's a full decade later. And it's not just age. The actual number of first-time buyers has also dropped. Right now, only 24% of home buyers are first-timers, which is the lowest number in over 40 years. So today, I'm going to explain the reality of why everyone feels this way. I want to help explain the real reasons behind the debt, the interest rates, the housing crisis, and the social media machine that's making everyone feel poorer than they actually are. Because here's the truth, you are probably doing a lot better than you think. You're just comparing your reality to someone else's curated illusion. I'm going to show you the truth behind the magic. So with that said, let's get into it. Hi, my name is Andre Jick. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for the magic of realizing not everything is what it seems right now. Because behind the scenes, most people are juggling debt and anxiety. And on the outside, we're still posting, we're still flexing, still pretending. So let me just start by exposing the biggest lie of all, which is of course, social media. Over 90% of young people use social media platforms every single day, and more than half of them check it over 30 times per week. And it's more than just a way to pass the time, because it also affects how we see our own lives. Studies show that 41% of millennials report buying things just to keep up, and almost 30% drive themselves into debt because of that pressure. Now, one of the reasons people do this, research says, is FOMO, which sounds kind of insane, but it's a very real thing. About 69% of millennials experience financial fear of missing out on a regular basis. But it's not just limited to millennials. Gen Z reports even higher levels. Around 70% say that they feel financially left out just from what they see online. And this phenomenon actually has a name. It's called money dysmorphia. Roughly 43% of Gen Z and 41% of millennials say that their perception of their own financial health is distorted, even when the numbers tell a completely different story. And TikTok isn't helping either. Over 50% of TikTok users say they're more likely to buy something after seeing it recommended by a creator with an Amazon storefront. And Gen Z shoppers are 34% more likely to make a purchase thanks to a TikTok influencer than by a traditional ad. Now, half report spending at least $100 on impulse buys in a past year alone. But there's also the rise of something called live shopping events on TikTok. In fact, a consulting company called McKinsey predicts 10 to 20% of all online sales will come from live commerce by 2026. That means every single scroll could be a scroll towards unnecessary spending. And you'd think after you buy what you want, you'd feel good about it. But that's also not the case, because studies show that it actually leads to regret. Around 25% of TikTok shoppers say that they wish they hadn't made the purchase at all. But here's something else that's interesting. While millions of people are overspending online, only about 58% of Americans actually own any stocks at all. And that number drops even lower for younger generations.
Among millennials, for example, only about 1 in 3 say they feel confident investing in the market. And for Gen Z, it's even less. And that's a big problem because owning assets is one of the biggest differentiators between building wealth and just barely keeping up. So while the highlight reels online create the illusion, our bank accounts are where the truth shows up. And how much people are spending is pretty crazy. Right now, Americans owe a record-breaking $18+ trillion in household debt. That's an increase of about $170 billion in just the last 3 months. That's like adding the entire GDP of Ukraine in just 90 days. And while most of that debt comes from mortgages, what's growing the fastest is credit card debt, and that is now sitting at an all-time high of $1.3 trillion. But here's the crazy part. The average credit card APR is now over 24%, which is also the highest it's ever been. So if you bought something for $1,000 and only made the minimum payments, it could take you years to pay it off. And by the end, you wouldn't pay $1,240 like you'd think. Instead, you'd pay closer to $1,400 because that interest adds up daily. That's the cost of buying things to impress people who probably financed their posts as well. And yet people just keep swiping their card anyway, not because they don't understand the math, but because it feels normal at this point. In fact, for a lot of people, traditional credit cards aren't even the biggest problem anymore. Instead, it's something called buy now, pay later. Services like Klarna, Afterpay, and Affirm have exploded in popularity over the last few years, especially with Gen Z and millennials. In 2021, for example, Americans spent around $2 billion using these services. By 2024, that number jumped to over $46 billion. And it's not just for big-ticket items. People are financing groceries, clothing, gas, and even entertainment, like going to a concert. Which also explains why people seem to be doing better than you, when in reality, they're probably not because they're financing their entire lifestyle. According to a LendingTree report, for example, about 1 in 4 buy now, pay later users have used it to buy essentials. And here's where it gets risky. About 41% of people who use these services have missed a payment. That means millions of people are turning to short-term loans to afford basic needs and wants, and then falling behind on those. So if you've been wondering how everyone seems to be spending so effortlessly, the truth is they're not. They're borrowing invisibly and a lot of times unsustainably. And a huge part of why all this debt feels so crushing right now is also because borrowing has never been more expensive. Interest rates are at the highest levels we've seen in decades. Right now, the Federal Reserve's target rate is sitting between 5.25 and 5.5%, which affects almost every part of the financial system. That number drives the cost of everything from car loans to credit cards to student loans and mortgages. Car loans are now averaging 7.5% to 9%, depending on your credit. That's insane. And mortgages, the traditional 30-year fixed mortgage rate, is between 6 and 7%, which is more than double what it was just a couple years ago. Now, to put that in perspective, if you were buying a $500,000 house in 2020 at a 3% interest rate, your monthly payment would have been around $2,100. But at today's 7% rate, that same house would cost you over $3,300 a month. That's $1,200 more every single month for the exact same house. Not because the house has changed, but because the cost of money changed. And this is what most people don't realize. The interest rate alone can price people out of a middle-class lifestyle. So you're not making less money, you're just being charged a lot more for access to it. So even if you're not racking up credit card debt or financing your next concert, just trying to do the normal things like buy a car and get a house comes with the premium that your parents never had to deal with. And all of that brings us to the biggest problem, the one that feels the most out of reach more than ever before: buying a house. Back in the 1990s, the average first-time homebuyer was just 28 years old. Today, that number is 38. That's a full decade later. And it's not just age. The actual number of first-time buyers has also dropped. Right now, only 24% of homebuyers are first-timers, which is the lowest number in 40 years. In the last 5 years alone, the number of US cities where a starter home costs over $1 million has almost tripled, from 85 cities to over 200.